When Jesus was leaving the temple, one of his disciples pointed to the temple, to the buildings, and said, "Look, teacher, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." And then Jesus shocked them by telling his disciples that there would not be left a stone of this building. Welcome to another tidbit from the Gospel of Mark. I'm Dr. Paul Petersen, and we are today going to look at the apocalyptic prophecy, the small apocalypse of Jesus, as recorded in Mark chapter 13. You have parallel recordings in Matthew 24 and 25 and in Luke 21. Mark has the shortest version. He does not, as Matthew, include the parables about how the church is to behave and wait for Jesus. So let's look at Mark's version. Before we go into the chapter, however, let's look at the two episodes which lead up to that sermon by Jesus. These episodes we find in verse 38 and 30 and 40, and in 41 to 43, and they both concern widows. Jesus teaches, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for a show make lengthy prayers. Such men will be punished most severely." And then Jesus walks and sits opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. There were many places, tradition says 13 places, where you could put money as a gift to the temple. Many rich people threw in large amounts, and some of them would probably make a point out of being watched. But a poor widow came and put in two very small copper coins worth only a fraction of a penny. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, this poor widow has put more into the treasure than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in everything, all she had to live on." And what she put in was remarkably little. In Greek, two lepta, which Mark translates into the Latin quadrans, because he speaks to a Latin audience around Rome. The amount would be 1/64 of a denarius. That is, she would have to put 64 quadrans into the box to give a salary for a 1 day's work. But yet it was all she had. She would have been living in extreme poverty, but gave all she had. Now, why are these episodes told here? And I think one of the reasons is indicated when Jesus says such men will be punished most severely. Because here you find one of the reasons for the judgment over the leaders of the Jewish people at the time, and the judgment which would also hit the temple. So let's look into it. Jesus answers the disciples with their question about what will happen. They questioned the fate of the temple, but to them that was also the end of the world, so Jesus links these two, even though we in history realize that they are not the same. "Watch out that no one deceives you," Jesus begins in verse 5. "Many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and will deceive many." When you hear wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. These are the beginning of the birth pains. Now, Matthew, like Mark, points out that there will be general signs of trouble in the world, and these signs will happen throughout history. They are not the end, even though many Christians look at earthquakes and famines and wars and say, now this is certainly the end. It is not. And then here, the first warning by Jesus, you must be on your guard. The similar expression is translated a little later in verse 23, so be on your guard, and in verse 33, be on guard, be alert. So this is appeal by Jesus, the admonition, be on your guard. And then back to verse 9 and the following verses, Jesus tells the early Christians what will happen. Persecution, being brought to judges, be arrested, asking for and experience the Holy Spirit to help them answer accusations, that brothers will betray brother and father his child. All men will hate you because of me, Jesus says in verse 13, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. All of this is what happened to the early Christians. And then the climax, the direct answer to the question by the disciples. In verse 14, when you see the abomination that causes desolation, standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. This is a prediction about the destruction of Jerusalem. The abomination that causes desolation, or the abomination of desolation, is a term taken directly from Daniel chapter 9, repeated in chapter 11. Shekuts, the abomination. It is not, as sometimes claimed, an expression you find in Daniel 8. There the issue is different. In Daniel 9, it is Jesus' direct prophecy about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. The prophecy about the Romans. Now, I know that if you go to various critical scholars, this prophecy in Daniel is interpreted as a prophecy of Antiochus IV Epiphanes in the 2nd century before Christ, and that's the way it was reused by the Maccabees in their rebellion against this Syrian king. However, Jesus makes it clear that this prophecy relates to the Romans and the destruction of the Jewish temple. This is the starting point. And what is described next in the following verses in Mark 13 further explores that event, but then Jesus moves from that event to a similar event at the end of time. That is, linking the two issues that concern the disciples and which in their minds were one, that is the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the world. Jesus makes it clear they will again be people who claim that they have seen Christ at that time. Verse 21, if anyone says to you, look, here is Christ, or look, here he is, do not believe it. False Christ and prophets will appear. We also have today a number of people in the Christian world who take the second coming as a spiritualistic event, not something that happens outside them, who saw Jesus come by the eyes of faith. Watch out. Be on your guard, Jesus said. I have told you so ahead of time. As Jesus moves on, there are several questions we could raise, and I'll raise two of them. After all, it's tidbits, I cannot cover everything. In verse 28, Jesus says to the disciples, "Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that the summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away." And then the question, of course, is raised, did Jesus predict that those living at his day would be still alive when he returned? And the answer is no. The meaning of this generation doesn't have to be this particular chronological historical generation, but such generation. It's qualitative. This is the way that Jesus in Mark has spoken about this generation previously. In 9:19, you disbelieving generation, the same sinful generation in 8:38, and in reality it mirrors the way that Deuteronomy in verse 1:35 and 32:20 has described, or did describe, the generation that did not enter Canaan. Such generation is the point. They will be such disbelieving, mocking, sinful generation to the very end. And now Jesus says something that raises another question. No one knows about that day, in verse 32, or hour, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. And some would say, but does Jesus not know? He is God. Does he not know when he returns? And the answer is maybe more simple than we think. He is here speaking not from his natural divinity, but as the Son, as the incarnate who has left his right to use his divine power for himself. He doesn't know. He is the Son who has submitted to the will of his Father, as we will see in the chapter to follow. So, at that time, no, Jesus did not know. But it doesn't take his divinity away from him. We are speaking about Jesus here from the point of humanity. And then another thought that is worth contemplating. When Jesus says, no one knows about that day, he might imply the difference between the prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem and the prophecy about the second coming of Christ. Because we are not to speculate on time on the second coming of Christ. We should be alert and not doing it. Speculating in time about that event is a sin. And a lot of people are performing that. They are doing that. However, the prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem was exactly a time prophecy. So Jesus may say about that day, that is the day of the second coming, don't speculate in time. We do not know it. Because we did know the time for the destruction of Jerusalem based on the prophecy in Daniel 9. So at the end, don't speculate in time. Don't listen to those people who say, oh, it would at least happen before or at latest in 2027. This is what Jesus warns us against. Be on guard. His point is, be alert, be awake. Keep your eyes on me and be awake in your faith relationship with Jesus Christ rather than speculating where you are not supposed to speculate. Look at him. Be alert, be on guard. Thank you for listening to this tidbit from the Gospel of Mark. Welcome back as we continue into chapter 14 in the narrative about the sufferings of Christ.